So the today's meeting will be from 6 to 7:30. Maharaj will guide us on the topic of essence of Vaishnava etiquette. And then if the devotees, if they have got very important questions in this topic, they can always ask this question, and we can have one-to-one question answer session. Maharaj, is this okay with you?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thanks a lot, Maharaj. So, yeah, Maharaj, you can start your discussion or lecture.
Thank you, Mohan Gopal Prabhu. Thank you all for joining this afternoon, evening. And yes, I'm appreciating the topic, the essence of Vaishnava etiquette. I hope I can at least stir up some reflection on the subject. And I think, if nothing else, it will be good for myself to reflect on this subject. So let's begin with some pranati. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitangscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'd like to give maybe my own title to this presentation, namely the spirit and substance of Vaishnava etiquette, or Sadachara, as it's called in Sanskrit. I'll explain the two terms, Vaishnava etiquette and Sadachara, in a moment. But I think a nice starting point will be a statement from Srila Prabhupada in the Sri Ishopanishad. If you look in his purport to text number 10, you'll see he gives a list of 18 principles of, we may say Vaishnava culture. I don't remember exactly how he calls it. Basic directions for becoming a Vaishnava. And the first of these, he says, and I quote, "One should become a perfect gentleman and learn to give proper respect to others." So we may say, well, okay, that's good for the men. What about the ladies? Same thing, just fill in the blank instead of gentlemen, ladies. And we can say a perfect gentleman knows how to behave in relation to ladies and gentlemen, and also those who are not ladies and gentlemen. And so we also have a nice model for behavior, of course, in our Srila Prabhupada. And going back in tradition, we may remember what Srinivasa Acharya tells us about the Shat Goswami. Krishna kirtana gana nartana paro premamritam bonidi dira dira janapriyo priyakaro nirmatsaro pujito. Dira and adira jana, persons who were dira, or we can say gentlemen, and adira, those who are not gentle, the ruffians or the uncultured. Dira dira jana priya. The six Goswamis were dear to both kinds of persons. And why? Because they themselves were dira, they were perfect gentlemen, we can say. Which is to say they understood the principles and the spirit and the substance of Vaishnava etiquette. And therefore they knew the finer points. They knew the principles, they knew the finer points, and they lived by them, and they gave example, and they inspired others to follow them. So a little about these terms. We use this expression Vaishnava etiquette, and I meant to look, maybe someone can look this up, but where do we find this specific expression? When was it first used? It's obviously, the word etiquette it's an English word, but obviously for some of us, it comes from French. And it's been employed, it's come to be employed by devotees for what traditionally would be called sat achara. Sat achara. And so I think it's good to know that sadachara is behind Vaishnava etiquette. And then we have to ask, what does sadachar mean? The word achara, well, it relates in a very broad sense to the notion of action or behavior, achara. And in our tradition, we want to connect achara with prachara. That if we want to be successful in the propagation, in the communication of Krishna Bhakti, then there has to be alignment between these two principles, achara and prachara. People will listen to those who are well behaved and not otherwise. Sat achar. Sat, of course, can mean simply truth. It can mean what exists as opposed to asat. It can mean right or proper. And so, and sat can also refer to persons. It can refer to sadhus. Sometimes we see the word sant, santaha. It's a Sanskrit word, and I don't know if it's cognate with the English word saint, possibly, but it sounds like it should, and that's good enough for now. So you could say sadachar is the behavior of saints, or we could also take it the other way around. It's behavior in relation to saints. So we can say saintly behavior or behavior towards saints. But it also has the sense of, sat has the sense of rightness, substantiality, realness. So we can also think of sadachar as being authentic, being, like we say in sort of slang English, we say, get real. Get real. Sometimes we may scold someone, get real. It's kind of a challenge. Don't be superficial. Say what you really think. It can mean like that. But it means being authentic. And so we might say on a deeper level, sadachar is about integrity. Integrity. Saying what we think and thinking what we say and acting in, again, in alignment on the basis of principles, on the basis of values. What values? Well, the value of sat, of truth, of reality, of spiritual existence. So, and then this has come to be referred to, however it came about, with this term Vaishnava etiquette. And so it seems we've become a little bit, we're narrowing things down in a way by saying Vaishnava, because sat can mean sadhu, and sadhus, there are so many sadhus, they may or may not be Vaishnava. Yeah, there are Shaiva sadhus and so on. And just good people. The word sadhu can also mean good. People who are pious, who are good. But okay, Vaishnava we may take in a broad sense. What do we mean by Vaishnava? Bhaktivinoda Thakur spoke of Saragrahi Vaishnava. It's one who seeks the essence, the best of persons, of situations, of everything. In any case, then what about this word etiquette? So I looked it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. And it kind of comes down basically, although it comes from the word for ticket, which is something to gain entrance into some event, perhaps. A ticket getting a ticket to watch Krishna fighting the wrestlers in the wrestling arena, perhaps. But then it comes to mean proper behavior in court, the court of the king, the royal court. Different royal courts all over the world have, over the centuries, had their very particular standards of behavior, of protocol, how respect is shown to the king or the queen, when to speak, when not to speak, how to speak, what words to use, all these sorts of things. One could also say it has a more broad sense of convention, conventional behavior. What is considered appropriate is etiquette. Also, I didn't see this in the dictionary, but it's been said that from the French, it can mean little ethics, little ethic. So it's the, shall we say, the minor details of ethics. And so we might say that on the surface, etiquette, the sort of connotation that I have of etiquette is it's about being polite as opposed to being rude or being coarse in one's behavior. And it's been said by one French writer on ethics and on virtues. He speaks about politeness as a kind of step one toward virtues. He says politeness in itself is not exactly a virtue, but it's kind of necessary in human society. And this is what parents are always very concerned to teach their young children from early ages what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do in various situations. And these may be how to behave at the dinner table, don't throw your food around or whatever. I think we all had experience as children with parents reprimanding us for various improprieties at the dinner table. And we've all been molded by that. So that's politeness. It's not virtue. It's not really the substance of what we're interested in, I would say, with Sat Achar. Well, those are some maybe preliminary, if you like, definitions, but we want to fill those out. We want to make something of them. And of course, in my talk in general, I'm speaking very much in general. So as Vaishnavas, we are concerned about proper behavior. We are concerned about making a distinction between proper and improper behavior. And of course, we're behaving, we're acting, we are speaking always in a context of ourselves pursuing what Srila Prabhupada always called Krishna consciousness. We want to be Krishna conscious. We want to be agents for the manifestation of Krishna conscious atmosphere. We want to support the creation of atmosphere and consciousness of Krishna. And so in that spirit, we behave. And if we want to get a little bit more specific about this, we might recognize very quickly that considerations of behavior in Vaishnava culture will put some emphasis on what we may want to call rank. Rank meaning recognizing superior, inferior, higher and lower. And this may be of different sorts of consideration, whether socially ranking or spiritually ranking, or there may be combinations of both. And sometimes this can get a little bit complicated, judging rank. The concern for rank, if we want just for a minute to go to Krishna's pastimes, we may recall in Mahabharata that Lord Krishna was elected to be the recipient, or the first recipient. I don't know if it says first or the only recipient of the Argya at King Yudhishthir's Rajasuya sacrifice. And this had a lot of significance. It was a recognition that Krishna was the number one person to be honored. And as we all know, Shishupal didn't like that. He didn't think Krishna was the first person to be honored. He thought this was very improper, because he said there are so many much more senior persons here. There's Bhishmadev, for example. He's much older. He's obviously much more to be honored than Krishna. And besides, and then he goes on with all the various insults to Krishna, one after another, until he comes to 100 insults. And this ushers the end for him and his liberation into the body of Krishna. So the concern for rank is one concern. And at the same time, it's something which the Vaishnavas are, in a sense, always looking for the deeper substance of. And the example that just now comes to my mind here is Sri Advaitacharya recognizing Sri Haridas Thakur as the first person to receive the patra, the prasad, from a Shraddha ceremony which he has conducted. Normally it would go to the Brahmins, and so many Brahmins would have been there, eager to get their prasad. But Advaitacharya recognized Srila Haridas Thakur, the Namacharya, as the first person to receive this honor. Behind and above and underneath and around these considerations of rank are, of course, the central importance of acknowledging the Lord's presence in all circumstances and in everyone's heart. And so we may say that Vaishnava behavior or sadachara is that behavior which draws out or which is conducive to everyone feeling the presence of the Lord, drawing out. The Lord is present in everyone's heart, but he's hidden. And the behavior of the Vaishnavas is such that they are at least trying to draw out, in common language, we can say draw out the best of people. And what is the best? The best is their Krishna consciousness, whether or not they would call it that. There's also a nice general principle I've found helpful, which I learned from the late His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami. He was very keen in giving seminars on Vaishnava etiquette. And I always remember one point he would make is that Vaishnava etiquette is about maintaining a kind of circulation whereby we, the devotees, are eager to offer respect to the superior. So we're offering to the senior devotees, we're offering to Guru, and so on. And of course, ultimately, we're offering respect to Krishna. So that's one side of what is, he described it as a kind of creation of like an electric current. We offer our respect up, and this inspires mercy to come down. We're offering respect up, mercy is coming down. Offering respect up, mercy is coming down. And this we can all understand in practical ways. We all have experience that just, for example, in school, if we have had a good relationship with a teacher, we're naturally showing some respect to that teacher, and that's inspiring that teacher to naturally give us some special attention, some special care. Somehow inspiration comes to us from that teacher. So that's a kind of natural dynamic, and that I would call it a circulation principle. I would say it is it's very much driving and energizing the devotees in our spiritual practice. And it becomes integral to what it is about sadhu sangha, association with devotees, which is giving us spiritual strength and giving us inspiration. Okay, now I want to suggest, this is possibly a little arbitrary, but it came to my mind we can think of three sorts of foundations of Vaishnava etiquette, of sadachar. One foundation is austerity, one foundation is wisdom, and a third foundation is love. We may want to say tapa, jnana, or vijnana, and prema. And I would suggest a good place to start in thinking about austerity is a very nice little section in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17. verses 14, 15, and 16, in which Lord Krishna is listing features of 3 types of austerity in the mode of goodness. He speaks about many principles in terms of 3 modes of nature, and then he kind of pauses and elaborates on austerity in the mode of goodness by giving 3 verses instead of just 1 verse on the topic. And the 3 verses are in the mode of goodness. Austerity are to do with austerities of the body, austerities of speech, and austerities of the mind. And so he says in verse number 14, Deva Dvija Guru Pragnya Pujanam Sochamarjavam Brahmacharyam Ahimsa Cha Shariram Tapa Uchyate. He's suggesting here, he's emphasizing, I would say, the point of showing respect to superiors with the body. So doing puja, offering worship to whom? To the Lord, to the Brahmins, to the Guru, to the wise persons, prajna. In other words, anyone who is deserving of respect because of some superiority, and then to show that respect, that in a broad sense, that is puja. It's not necessarily just waving incense and lamps before the person, but showing respect. Socham is an austerity. It can also be an austerity to not be clean. Devotees like to be clean, and when we are in situations where we can't be clean, that can be another sort of austerity. But to be clean is, we can say, a sort of preliminary feature of sadachar. And of course, in texts like Hari Bhakti Vilasa, there's so much discussion about purity, cleanliness, purity. So many details are there. You can spend, half your day doing all these procedures for purification. But of course, we're looking for the basic principle, not so much necessarily the details. Arjavam is included as an austerity of the body in the mode of goodness, although it means straightforwardness, which we associate with speech. It may also apply to our behavior. We may, the opposite of arjavam is being devious, not being straightforward, so one can also act in ways which are not straightforward. Brahmacharyam, of course, it can mean celibacy. It can also mean, very broadly, I found it helpful to understand this way, respecting sexual boundaries in the broadest sense. And of course, that's a big topic everybody likes to talk about, but I won't elaborate here. But it certainly is a matter very much of Vaishnava etiquette. And it relates to socham because we understand where there is not proper behavior with respect to sexuality, that is associated with the compromise of socham, of purity. Ahimsa is a kind of self-restraint which is at the beginning of the classical yoga system of yama, niyama, the 5 principles of yama. The first is ahimsa, and the commentators say that actually ahimsa is fundamental to all the other principles of yoga. So if you want to practice yoga, step 1 is practice ahimsa. This is a principle which the Jain tradition makes into their core principle, elaborating in extreme detail, some of which would probably be useful for the Vaishnavas to learn from. Shariram tapa uchate, these are austerities. What kind of austerities? Of the body, but more specifically, austerities of the body in the mode of goodness. To become fixed or established or settled in the mode of goodness is a value which Vaishnavas pursue. Sometimes we minimize, we say, oh, mode of goodness, who cares? We are transcendental. That can be a dangerous attitude because it can be an excuse for very improper and immoral behavior and non-ethical behavior. Austerity of speech in the mode of goodness, anudvega, maybe more quickly, but this is, in a sense, perhaps central. Austerity of speech, anudvega karam vakyam satyam priyahitam chayat svadhyayabhyasanam cha eva vanmayam tapa uchate. The austerities of speech, vanmaya, are listed here briefly. And of course, each one of them could be elaborated so much. Anudvega karam, speaking in a way which is disturbing, unnecessarily disturbing. Then on the other side, satyam, speaking the truth. And one immediately says, well, what if speaking the truth is disturbing? That's the inevitable question. That is where the expertise has to come. Sometimes one does have to speak in a disturbing way. And Srila Prabhupada in one lecture said, our business is to disturb the demons. So there may be appropriate times when we need to cause disturbance. Priyahitam, speaking pleasingly and beneficially. Hita has the sense of benefit, and we may want to say this is at the core of determining what to say, what not to say, is to ask ourselves, is what I'm going to say going to be beneficial for the person or persons who will hear what I'm saying? Svadhyaya abhyasanam, to practice abhyasanam, svadhyaya, seems to be odd because what does it have to do with speech if I'm doing self-study? Well, it's very much typically done aloud. One is reciting hymns or mantras from the Veda, and sva can refer to one's own Veda, svadhyaya. And then going on to mana, to austerities of the mind, we may want to say that sadachar really is rooted here because depending on what is going on in our mind, that will come out in our speech and our behavior. And therefore, it says, mana prasada, be pleased in the mind. Cultivate a sense of being pleased, being peaceful, being satisfied in the mind. Mm. And then somyatvam is a kind of, well, mildness. It can mean monam generally means silence, which may seem like, again, for speaking, but it can mean also stilling the mind. Atma vinigraha, atma can refer to the mind, and vinigraha, graha means grasping, nigraha means grasping down, vinigraha means thoroughly grasping down. In other words, really having control, being self-controlled. Atma can also just mean the self-control. And bhava samshuddhi, purification of existence, purification of one's very being, is, again, a kind of foundational principle. Etat tapa manasamucchate. Okay, I should move along and then leave some time for discussion. So we're talking about three general principles. I'm suggesting there's austerity, then our next topic is wisdom. And here I would say the general principle of wisdom is listening for Krishna's direction. And Krishna gives us a clear indication of how to do this in Bhagavad Gita when he says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. He says, for those who are constantly engaged, satata yukta, in service, in worship, bhajatam, in a favorable way, priti purvakam, having priti in front. Purva means in front or in the first position. Making, in other words, making as one's primary purpose, purvaka, to please the Lord. Krishna says, for such a person, dadami, I give. What do I give? Buddhi yogam, I give the yoga of discernment, the yoga of being awake, of being sensitized, of being intelligent. What is that buddhi yogam? It's that by which yena ma te upayanti, he comes, or he goes. Where does he go? Mam, to me. So that's buddhi yoga. It's a practice, abhyasa, and the condition that Krishna gives for us to hear from Krishna is that we're always engaged in his service. So hearing from Krishna means then we are getting wisdom. Krishna is giving us insight how to act in the best way in particular circumstances. In Aristotle's, in the ancient Western philosopher Aristotle's Greek, in his book on ethics, what is it called? Nicomachean Ethics or something. I believe it's there. He says no amount of rules, of moral directions or rules or laws will give us clear knowledge, will give us a definite awareness of what we should do in a particular situation, because that particular situation that comes is going to be unique. It's not something that can be anticipated by any number of rules and laws. Which means, for a devotee, it means being tuned in, if you like, to Krishna. Krishna's tips, Krishna's whispering, saying, Krishna, what should I do here? Do like this. Oh, okay. There's a process for this that's given in the Upanishads. It begins with Shravanam, and it goes to the next step, which is Mananam, hearing and then reflecting on, thinking about, using one's mind, one's intelligence, thinking about how what one's heard relates to what else one has heard or one has experienced, and so on. And then the third and final of these three steps is nididhyasanam, which is, I would say, something like digestion. You take it in, and then the body has to digest. Or we can say, if we're using the eating metaphor, we're taking it into the mouth, we're chewing, and then swallowing, and then we are digesting. And then the digested nourishment gives us energy, and that energy allows us to act in the proper way. A third point that I would just throw in the mix here with regard to wisdom is taking responsibility for our choices. We recognize that we are choice makers. That's kind of foundational to the whole idea of ethics. It's foundational to the whole message of Bhagavad Gita, because Krishna is advising Arjuna, and then in the end he's asking Arjuna, or he's allowing Arjuna to make his choice. He does not make Arjuna's choice for him. So we make choices, we make them all the time, all day long. We're making choices, and then choices always have consequences, and it's then for us to accept the consequences, to take responsibility for them. If we've made a choice which has not been good for us or for others, we recognize it, we hope that we can learn from it and make a better choice next time. We don't lament, we simply learn and move on. And then the third principle of these three is love, or prema, or we may want to say more broadly, bhakti. And here I would suggest a general principle is, well, it goes back to listening, but now we're listening for Krishna's love through his devotees. We're finding Krishna's love manifest in his devotees. Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita also expresses his compassion when he says, Tesham evanukampartam, Aham jnana jam tama nashayam yatma bhavasto jnana deepena basvata. But that sort of points back to jnana. He's giving the light of knowledge, but he's giving it because of anukampa artha, because of the in the interest artha of anukampa, of compassion, which is his feeling for the devotee. And so the devotee takes that as the Lord's compassion, as the Lord's love. Any illumination received from the Lord is gratefully received. Other examples we might expand on, but I'll just mention, as I was hearing some very nice talks by Madhavananda Prabhu on exchange, well, part of a longer series, but he's talking about the exchange of Nanda Maharaj with Akrura. When Akrura comes to Vrindavan, he meets, of course, the residents, he meets Nanda Maharaj, and he tells Nanda about all the troubles that are going on in Mathura because of this terrible so-called king, Kamsa. And Nanda Maharaj listens empathetically. He's not saying something like, well, you think you have troubles, we have our own troubles here in Braj, we get all these demons coming all the time, and there's no peace. He doesn't say that. He listens. He listens to Akrura, and he sympathizes with him. And also we may look at Krishna and his interaction with his devotees in so many ways, but perhaps in particular what came to my mind is his statement to the gopis of confession, naparayeham niravadya samyujam, that he says, I do not have the capacity to reciprocate your love. Now, this could be taken as an example of arjavam, of straightforwardness and honesty, but it's also priyahitam. It's also speaking for the benefit and, in fact, to please the gopis, although it may sound like something that's ultimately a disappointment, but he speaks in such charming ways with the gopis, in loving way. And this we can think of as a kind of model, as an example of how we want to interact among the devotees. I mentioned before about rank, thinking in terms of, superiority, respect, and so on. But we must be very conscious also to be caring and concerned with respect to equals and those in a so-called lesser position, because all of these, any number of variations of these different relationships will always be there. We will always be in relation to others who are in an inferior position, an equal position, a superior position, and we want to act in the best way with respect to all of them. Okay, I have then also a few words of, let us say, conclusion, maybe not utterly conclusive, but some things to consider. We may want to keep in mind that Srila Prabhupada sometimes would say that, or many times would say, Krishna consciousness is a science. It's also an art. And we may wonder how these two are related. Well, it is a science, especially with respect to the principles. And it's an art with respect to details. And we can say the principles, we want to preserve principles. We don't want to lose sight of principles. We want to nourish our sense of what are our principles, our values. And we want to be responsive to particular circumstances. As I said just a few minutes before this, like Aristotle was saying, every situation will be unique. And that means being able to adjust appropriately and wisely the details of Krishna consciousness. And in all cases, we certainly want to recognize that intelligence or discernment or, buddhi yoga is necessary. And how do we get this? Well, I always go back to Narottam Das Thakur, Sadhu Shastra Guru Vakya, Hridoye Koryo Aikya, Satatam Vasibo Prema Maje. We hear from sadhus, from gurus, and from Shastra. And all of what we hear, we process through Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, and by that process, it becomes an aikya, it becomes a singular understanding, a clear understanding in the heart, by which then Krishna feels pleased to be manifest in the heart, to be present, or for us to feel his presence in the heart. And what's the goal for ourselves? Satatam vasibo prema maje, to become immersed, always to swim in prema, in Krishna prema. And that will happen when we practice to sensitize ourselves to the words and to develop the faith in the words of Sadhu, Shastra, and Guru. Sadhu, Shastra, Guru, Vakya. So this brings us back to our opening statement of Srila Prabhupada. One should become a perfect gentleman and learn to give proper respect to others. I think that's a good pivotal principle. And to learn better many of the finer points of Sadachar, I strongly recommend reading Chaitanya Charitamrita. I believe this is one of the aims that Krishnadas Kaviraj had in writing Chaitanya Charitamrita. He wanted to show these details. This is how Vaishnavas interact with other Vaishnavas. This is how Vaishnavas show respect for other Vaishnavas, how they honor and serve each other. And of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, coming himself in the mood of a Vaishnava, a Bhakta, a devotee, is the model of that behavior. So these are a few thoughts, and I hope I kept to the subject. Hope I didn't wander, but I will, I think, end there and see if anyone wants to raise an issue, a question, a comment. Or did I leave you all confused so you don't even know where to begin to ask a question?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. My most humble obeisances. Jai Shri
Hare
Prabhupada.
Krishna.
We would like to ask you if you could comment something about offenses towards Vaishnavas. We personally received a really heavy lessons after offending or acting not according to the etiquette. Maybe you could warn us a little bit.
Warning. Yeah, we have a big sign. Warning. Vaishnava etiquette means do not offend the Vaishnavas. And of course, the main danger, generally the danger of Vaishnava aparada happens in this area of speech, right? And how does it happen? Well, words have a way of, well, let's put it this way, as Srila Prabhupada so many times explained, one thing that we all have in common with animals is actually four things: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And defending, how do we defend ourselves? One way we defend ourselves is with words, or we try to defend ourselves with words, or we think we're defending ourselves with words. And sometimes we are not only, sometimes we may not just be defending ourselves, but attacking another with words, wanting to harm another with words. And the problem with words is you can't really take them back. We all have experience, isn't it? We've said something to someone and then we say, oh no, why did I say that? Or, especially nowadays, we're all sort of living on the internet. We may write something on the internet and then, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have written that, or whatever. For that, I have one sort of, you say in German, Daumenregel, a rule of thumb, Daumenregel. If somebody writes you something that upsets you on the internet, whether it's an email or, you know, a Facebook message or something, if you're upset, whatever you do, don't reply immediately. I recommend waiting 24 hours. You'd be amazed at how much wisdom will come to you if you do that within those 24 hours. Whereas if you react immediately, you know, with a counter attack or whatever, very good chance you will regret. Isn't it so? Yep. I see some nodding heads. Yes.
True.
So it's, you know, it's something I'm also working on this. It's not like I've worked it all out. I'm preaching to myself. And in the Catholic tradition, they make a distinction. There are sins of commission and sins of omission. There are things that you actively do, which are a sin, which are bad, which are anartha. And there are things you don't do, and that's also wrong. So to not do something may also be wrong. To not say something may be wrong. And to not say something may be an aparad. We may offend someone by not saying something. So it's a challenge. And we have the story, some of you may remember it better than I do, the details, but how was it? Srila Rupa Goswami was meditating on Krishna's pastimes. In his deep meditation, he observed some exchange of Krishna with the gopis, which was humorous. And in his meditation, Rupa Goswami was laughing, but he was laughing aloud. And as he was laughing aloud, one devotee, and I don't remember the name or if the name is known, happened to be walking by and happened to think, or came to think that Rupa Goswami is laughing at him. So neither did Rupa Goswami have any intention. He didn't even have intention. He had no consciousness. Still, that devotee felt offended, and his having felt offended disturbed Rupa Goswami's bhajan. He found that for some time something is wrong. He couldn't understand what it was, and he finally found out that this devotee had misunderstood his internal ecstasy. So sometimes we might offend someone we don't even intend. We don't intend it. And therefore, devotees are always very anxious to beg for the blessings of the devotees and to say, in case I have made any offense, please forgive me. We're always trying to cover ourselves. In case I have said something wrong, done something wrong, in case I didn't do something that I should have done.
Thanks a lot, Maharaj.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot for such an enlightening answer, because most of us, we are always very fearful about this if we do some offensive behavior with the Vaishnavas, and this was quite enlightening. There is one more question from Harinam Chintamani Mataji from Leipzig, and she is asking that could you please elaborate on cultivation of peaceful and a satisfied mind, especially in the unsettled times. So these very disturbing times, how can we keep our mind peaceful and satisfied?
Yes, we all have this challenge. The mind is always hungry for something more, something different, something changing. The mind is restless. And of course, in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 6, when Krishna is, shall we say, preaching to Arjuna to control his mind, at one point in chapter 6, Arjuna says, this is hopeless. You're telling me to do something. It's like trying to control the wind. And then Krishna says, you're right. What is it? Asangshayam mahabaho mano durnigraham chalam. He says the mind is durnigraha. We said one of the principles is of the austerities of mind is atma vinigraha. So he says the mind is durnigraha. It's difficult. And it's chalam, it's flickering, it's constantly jumping. It's on one thing and it's jumping to something else. I think it's Srila Ramanujacharya who describes what is successful meditation. Am I supposed to do something here? It says Mrinakshi Devi Dasi enter. Oh, that's taken care of. Okay. He says the meditative mind is compared to the steady stream of oil. Now our minds are more like water. It's sort of splashing and here and going there. But the steady stream of pouring oil, that's what we're looking for. That's what we're aiming for in meditation. And yeah, it's the how question. How can we? Well, it's our whole process, isn't it? In one sense, because Krishna is saying also in that chapter, Gita, chapter 6, from whatever and wherever the mind wanders, due to its flickering and unsteady nature, bring it back under the control of the self. So then the question is how to do that. And what seems to me, what I find helpful is to learn to gently but firmly ask oneself the question, my dear mind, where are you going now? And it's not a judgmental question. Maybe the mind needs to go to something. Maybe it's important to deal with. Okay. But maybe it's not necessary to go there now. So then by asking the question, where are you going now? It calls for an answer. It's a gentle challenge to the mind. And the challenge is coming from beyond the mind. It's coming from the intelligence. If you try to control the mind with the mind, you may find it difficult because the mind is tied more or less to the senses. It's tied to the memory also. And of course, it's very much identifying with emotions. So then to simply ask where, okay, my dear mind, where is that you're going now? Maybe you can just come back and focus on Krishna for now, and we can deal with that later if there's something we need to deal with. And in that way, we can cultivate a kind of steady, gradual practice of returning. Ultimately, what we're coming back to, because Krishna says under the control of the self, can mean Atma, can mean Paramatma. under the control of the self. The example is given in the Bhagavatam 11th canto of training horse. Horse trainers know that you have to be gentle and firm with a horse that you're training. If you're too firm, the horse is going to throw you off. You have to be gentle. And then gradually, with a high sensitivity, a good horse trainer is highly sensitive to how the horse is behaving and can understand how the horse is thinking. So we have a wild horse, the mind. And yeah, we can ask when the mind goes somewhere which aren't, we kind of, many things we may think of the mind, we see the mind's going there, we can say, what is your purpose there?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. We have got a couple of questions. Depending on the time, we can take them.
Yes.
So, the first question is from Yulia Mataji from Leipzig. And she is asking that in Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, it is mentioned that in order to become Dhira or get to the platform of Dhira, one has to get blessings from Vidura. So how to get his blessings?
Vidura's blessings. That's in first canto?
So she mentioned this, yeah.
I see Yulia's nodding. Okay. Well, we can pray to Vidura to give his blessings. And we can see in what spirit we can try to appreciate the spirit of Vidura. Vidura, was in a very troubled situation. The family situation was not peaceful. His advice was not appreciated. He was doing his best to give good advice to Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana. They were not accepting it. They just became angry. And so he understood, okay, he accepted, maybe that's the blessing we're looking for, accepting circumstances, the reality of a circumstance. In other words, Vidura was a realist. He recognized, okay, this is the situation. It's beyond my sphere of influence. We hear that expression a lot nowadays. It's beyond my sphere of influence. And this comes back also to this question about finding peace in our minds, especially in current circumstances. What's disturbing us, we're all reading the news and we're seeing how much suffering is going on all over the world. And there's, what is that expression? You can become dull after some time. Your feelings of compassion become, you develop a kind of thick skin, You read that more than 2 million people have died of COVID, and you kind of shrug your shoulders. Yeah, well, what can I say? But it's simply a fact that we need to recognize what is our sphere of influence. What can we what can we actually do? Now, some people, they get very excited that, well, I'm expanding my sphere of influence, and that's why I spend all day on the internet sending messages to the world. Well, I don't know. Is that actually, is that, and for what purpose? And anyway, that's another subject. But the point is, Vidura recognized the limits of his sphere of influence, and he decided, okay, I'm out of here. And he left home. And elsewhere it said that he left home for 30 years. He went on pilgrimage, he wandered, and of course in the third canto he's meeting Uddhava and Maitreya, and he's learning from Maitreya especially. But he was absent during the whole, everything that was going on, the whole war of Kshetra. He missed the whole thing. So we may also seek blessings from Vidura to be aloof from all of the, the politics of this world. The winds that come and go and shift and come and go and blow everyone in one direction and another direction. Vidura said, okay, and it's described, he took his staff and he left. It doesn't even say he packed his bag. Just picked up his staff and he left. That doesn't mean that we should avoid responsibility, though. If we have within our sphere of influence, we have our responsibilities. So not that we too quickly give up responsibilities that we actually should be taking care of.
Yeah, thank you, Maharaj. We have only 1 minute. If we can take one more question, please.
A 1 minute question and answer.
I don't know, Maharaj. We are very open to hear from you. Depending on your time and everything, you can let us know. We are very happy when a Vaishnava speaks. We always want to hear more and more and more.
Well, let's take one more question. I don't like to go much longer because we all have our things to do.
Okay, so there is one. So Bhakta Anirudh from Cologne, he's asking that how to behave with arrogant people, non-devotees, who are impacting your bhakti. Also, when these non-devotees are from your own family, so you cannot really ignore them.
That can be quite a challenge. I suppose that's also a potential subject for a longer discussion. But just briefly, what comes to my mind is Srila Prabhupada's sister, Pishima, as she was known. Pishima means, does it mean auntie or sister? I don't know. Auntie, I guess. Prabhupada told once that her husband, Pishima's husband, Bhagavati was her name, her husband was not a devotee, was not sympathetic at all with Krishna consciousness. And in fact, I think he was eating like a typical Bengali. He was eating fish, and Prabhupada said that Pishima would cook it for him. She took it as her duty as a wife. She just quietly accepted, okay, he's expecting this of me. What can I do? Okay. And she just, in that way, saw herself as, okay, this is my dharma, my social dharma. And so she tolerated in that way. So on one side, there's the very broad and important principle of tolerance. And with that tolerance, I would say for yourself, there needs to be a sense of trying to appreciate that this situation has been arranged for me by Krishna. There is some purpose in this. I may not understand the purpose, but there is a purpose. And if I am patient and tolerant, then in due course of time, I may get a glimmer of understanding of why Krishna has put me in this situation. Now, impacting your bhakti can mean part of the reason for it is that Krishna wants to strengthen your bhakti, and therefore he's having you in that situation where others in the family are not sympathetic, maybe they're critical. And your only choice is to strengthen your bhakti as a result, to take the challenge as a challenge ultimately from Krishna, and to go more deeply into your depending on Krishna for strength. And there are a lot of stories of devotees who begin their journey in Krishna consciousness with inimical relatives. And eventually, and sometimes it can be in a fairly short time, sometimes it takes years, but the relatives have a change of heart. They come to recognize, they come to respect, they come to appreciate, sometimes they even become devotees themselves. And what that points to is that no matter how nasty they are, you keep your position as their well-wisher. Recognizing that their behavior, their words are based in ignorance. And ignorance means it's just ignorance. And ignorance can be removed. So those are a few thoughts. A lot of patience may be needed, but that's one of our basic principles. Utsaha nischayat dhairyat. Dhairya is like that, patience. And if it weren't your family members, and if it weren't some others that are giving you trouble, the trouble would come from somewhere else. Who knows? Right? So take it that way. Okay, Krishna's giving me this trouble like this. Let me make the most, do the best I can with it. Make the best use of a bad bargain.
Thanks, Lord Maharaj, for such a nice enlightening words.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So thank you for giving the opportunity, and all the best for your theme. I'm sure others will elaborate in wonderful ways. I hope this was good as a general introduction.
Yes, Maharaj, definitely. So it was quite enlightening. So basically in our temple, gradually we are discussing this Vaishnava etiquette manual, and every week we are going forward. And mostly in the temple, we are going to discuss how or what we need to do as a Vaishnavas. But maybe from your lecture, we came to know that why we need to do this and what is the principle behind it. So what we today heard is like austerity, wisdom, and prema. So these are the main important things. And basically how to become better person in front of our superiors. So it could be superior Vaishnavas in front of Lord Krishna and so on. And that is why this behavior is very, very important. So on behalf
it's also respecting not just Vaishnavas, it's respecting everyone. When Prabhupada says, be a perfect gentleman, he's talking about being properly behaving in all contexts.
True. Okay, Maharaj, but thanks a lot for your time. On behalf of ISKCON Leipzig and on behalf of all the devotees who have joined this Zoom meeting, I wholeheartedly thank you for your time and for your guidance. And we look forward to have you more times in such Zoom meetings at some point of time physically in Leipzig.
Indeed. Okay, thank you so much. Leipzig Yatra ki jai.
Thanks, Lord Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaura Premanande. Hari.
Hari Hari Bol. Hari Hari Bol.